Okay, so as I was saying, I just found this container and four bagels, right? Found the four bagels downtown. And I don't want to really go too much into detail about the implications of three everything bagels and one plain bagel, which matches the containers I found a while ago, which was three in one, and what the implications of that are, right? And I also found a bunch of red apples, right? It's kind of how it works. Usually there's some sort of major option that's executed in connection with some appearance of a food item or something else that you find on the street or at the train station. Somebody left there. I'm not exactly sure how people get cued to divest specific things in specific quantities, but I know they do because they cue me all the time too. I just don't do it because of what I said about divestment, right? And the problem is today is a 60-day timeline too. Today is 60 days after March 25th. If I'm not mistaken, tomorrow's the 26th. So tomorrow will be 60 days after March 26th. March 26th was the day, 5 years ago, that the order of protective custody was issued in connection with my kidnapping. 26th has already come, but on the 25th, something happened. I'm going to read this real quick. 8:12 p.m. Central Standard Time. Sometime between 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time and 8:11 p.m. Central Standard Time, a Stericycle truck drove by the Park Lane stop on Greenville Avenue, going south. Stericycle is, among other things, a company that provides disposal for dirties, otherwise known as spikes or sharps. From 2006 to 2008, we called them sharps. I worked for a nonprofit that, among other things, provided a sharps box to dispose of dirties. Later, in another city, I worked at another nonprofit that provided disposal of dirties via a sharps box. In both places, in one manner or another, I was responsible for seeing to it that money was available to pay for regular disposal of the dirties through collection by Stericycle. I've remarked in the last 2 years about how COVID-19 increased the need for disposal of dirties, although, presumably, under different circumstances. I am, however, concerned that the reporting on dirties because of COVID-19 may obscure accurate reporting on increased demand for disposal of dirties for other purposes. It is no small matter to me that my bridge from being a member of the National Political Committee of Democratic Socialists of America in or around 1997 to 1999 was the Neuropsychiatric Center, NPC, of the Baum Medical Center in Houston exactly 5 years ago today. I contended it was kidnapping as retaliation for attempting to report fraud and child abuse to mandated reporters in the form of health care professionals, as the people of the NPC reportedly identified themselves to be, which meant under Texas and federal law they are also mandated reporters of fraud and child abuse. I was subjected to 10 days of forced detention, did not meet legal requirements for determination of a medical treatment paradigm, while also being subjected to treatment that legally constitutes torture. In the course of this, I was subjected to illegal financialization processes that I understand to be a form of speculation on the behaviors of people alleged to be mentally ill or mentally disabled that legally constitute acts of trafficking. Trafficking is a crime that has been determined in the U.S. as being in legislative legacy to efforts to address violations of the 13th Amendment. In 1999, as a journalist and newspaper editor, I wrote articles and gave public presentations on how then unfolding legislative, prosecutorial, and diplomatic paradigms around accusations of trafficking had to contend with antiquated laws regarding peonage. Peonage as a crime is directly addressed by the federal court as a 13th Amendment violation, including in connection with interstate transportation and commerce considerations. Peonage was also legally defined in accordance with legislation regarding white slavery via the Mann Act, and is a specific crime that as of 2017, when the forced detention occurred, was a crime under the Texas Organized Crimes Act. Texas does not have civil recourse for RICO, as the federal statute determines racketeering, hence any civil considerations are subsidiary to and dependent upon consideration and determination of the criminal implications of racketeering. At the time, I first filed a case with the Texas Supreme Court on June 2nd, 2017, received on June 6th, 2017, and denied for lack of jurisdiction on June 8th, 2017. I did not consider the interstate implications of the events or charges. I contended that the retaliation was connected to me being forced to leave Houston and going to Pasadena, Texas because of threats by police, including threats that involved banning me from places that alleged to support homeless women and men, and an assault by a police officer in front of more than 100 people prior to being handcuffed in front of them and him taking a picture of me on his personal cell phone. I believed at the time, and only had evidence to substantiate, that this retaliation was for witnessing efforts to recruit homeless people into crimes by a person representing himself as the current chief of police for the Houston Police Department. That I was told by the IED officer I first attempted to report it to was at the time recently retired from the police force. Prior to these events, in addition to other things, I worked in a compliance unit for the San Francisco Department of Public Health Community Behavioral Health Services after working in the Operations and Facilities Management Department. In these two jobs, I learned about and was a part of developing the city county's emergency preparedness paradigm, the building security system, including employee identification card system, verification of provider credentials in order to bill for services. Primary billings of concern were to Medicare and Medicaid, or California Medi-Cal. It required monthly verification through 3 different databases, including the federal CMS OIG database, in order to assure provider compliance. This was for physicians as well as certified nurse practitioners, people who would be involved in the prescribing or administering of medication. I also had to investigate upgrades to the medical diagnostic code system, the ICD-9 to ICD-10, that was happening in the U.S. following implementation abroad, as well as review HIPAA policy regarding the areas that practitioners not only needed to know, but to follow to be compliant with the law. HIPAA was not just for providers that billed Medicare. During this time, I also reviewed the Medicare exclusions database, which listed providers excluded from eligibility to bill based on noncompliance, as well as the CMS OIG site for providers who had been convicted of Medicare fraud. At the time, I noticed what appeared to be a racially, ethnically targeting of prosecutions of people overwhelmingly and disproportionately identified as coming from either countries of the former Soviet Union, mostly the Ukraine and Georgia, and certain Central African countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic. I remarked on this to my supervisor, who was the director of compliance at the time. This was in late 2013 to early 2014. It appeared to cover the previous 2 to 3 years in terms of prosecutions, dates of conviction. This information does not appear on the CMS site as recently as 2018, but I contend is related to what happened in Houston as well as earlier. Specifically, the staff of the NPC and later West Oaks Hospital for the 7 days after the first 3 appeared to be from an African country primarily. This is important because the manner in which the staff from Africa reacted during my detention was markedly different than the way the American staff acted. I contended this appearance of racialization was intentional and, along with the other violations of law by the physicians and others, was part of a program of psychological operations intending to soften up people for recruitment into illegal activities at a more escalated or elevated level than the fraud and child abuse I witnessed at the domestic violence shelter that sent me there. I did not do any blood draws while I was detained, but other people did. In West Oaks, starting around the 3rd of 7 days, people were told to get blood draws in order to check their levels. I refused to ingest medication and I refused the blood draws, but was witness to how other people were engaged in efforts to compel them to take medication and get their blood drawn that did not adhere to the law. I reported these matters to the State Auditor's Office of Texas based on the Auditor's Office responsibility under the Texas Health and Human Services Commission in May 2017. For the first time, it was issued a report number that has not been responded to or officially closed out until this time. Attempts to tear this to my work at a nonprofit in Chicago or a nonprofit in San Francisco that disposed of dirties through a sharps box need to first be reconciled with my efforts to report fraud and child abuse beginning formally on March 25, 2017. Efforts to dig up my past and allude that what happened in March of 2017 is somehow justified based on unfounded and spurious accusations of my past history are part of the charges of torture. I did not allege torture specifically, but did identify, quote, techniques used on individuals accused of being enemy combatants, end quote, that have been, quote, challenged, end quote, in the U.S. and internationally for the relationship to acts of torture in my appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals after my case was denied at the Supreme Court of Texas. The Court of Criminal Appeals accepted my case and considered it, including via a markup by staff, between its acceptance on July 20, 2017 and its dismissal on August 23, 2017. I appealed the case and am still pursuing my rights to due process for the implications until today. that I acknowledged that I had found some books outside where I wrote this. This was my notice that was taking those books as evidence. I have pictures on here of the books that I took that day.